Hey guys, Lab Green Arrow here a bit, and I wanted to make a video talking about Big Sigh, Mortal Kombat 11 for a minute. So, um, I've been streaming again on occasion at twitch.tv/TrinityVolkFGC, and I've been having some new people come in, people who are picking up Injustice as a new game, or they're just wanting to get into it. But people who are aware of me and they were kind of a fan before, and so I deleted all my videos about MK11. You know, I just wanted to leave behind the game in the community at the time, and I still don't regret that I did that. But I'm being asked a lot by a lot of these new viewers, what exactly is it about MK11 that I thought made it so bad? So this isn't going to be anywhere near as detailed or anything as one of my videos I would have made in the past, but I'm just going to try to encapsulate it for you. So I'm going to talk about three things in regards to MK11. First thing is I found the game to be extremely boring. I thought there was nothing interesting to be found in playing the game, even at a high level. I found the game boring at all levels of play. The next thing is I'll be talking about how the game is accessible to an extreme detriment to the competitive environment. I sincerely believe that Mortal Kombat 11 is one of the worst fighting games ever made if the intent was it for it to be a skill-based competitive fighting game. The third thing comes down to developer attitude and the way the developers handled the game. It's no secret that I went from adoring NRS because of what they had done up to Injustice 2 to absolutely despising them with Mortal Kombat 11. Like I sincerely believe them to be one of the most unfriendly to consumers and longtime fans fighting game developers of all time. Maybe the worst. And I'll talk a little bit about that too. So I'm going to cut this part and we're going to start with, I think, the fact that the game is boring. We'll start there. It's no mystery that I find the game boring, mostly because of how limited the characters are and because of the custom variation system, right? So I really hope we'll see for their next game that NRS has maybe heard us for real this time. We do not want custom variations or variations, period. I feel like what ended up happening was we ended up with super stripped down characters that lacked in options across the board. I mean, MK11, you could be overpowered for having what would have been a basic essential tool in another NRS game because the power level had been stripped back so much and they had taken away so many options from characters, which is a thing that will tie in later to the accessibility problem. I honestly thought it was a snooze fest. Characters only had one optimal combo that usually didn't take a lot of execution to learn. Characters often only had one optimal custom variation loadout, so there was no room for expression or creativity at the highest level of the game. There just wasn't any. And it was also the fact that the game revolved so much around the flawless block OS that also shut down room for expression, and I'll get to that in the accessibility part of the video. I just didn't think the game had any substance. You figured out your character within the first hour of playing them, and it was like that for every character in the game. And I just don't think that should happen in a fighting game. I think if you're figuring out the characters within an hour, I mean, literally, character metas did not change from day one to the day support was ended. Some characters maybe changed slightly, like upgraded Jackie, but other characters like Scorpion, like the way that Scorpion was played literally did not change from day one. And I don't understand how NRS could think that the game was going to keep people invested. There's just no way. It's why I think that they cut off supports of the game. Is I think the game was a dead end. I think actually they lost money on it. I'm willing to bet you they lost money on MK11. I just don't think it had the substance there for the kind of people that play fighting games to dig into. So, I also think they contributed to the toxicity of the community during MK11's lifespan, by the way. When your game doesn't have anything to dig into, all you have left is to cause chaos, right? And I think that's what a lot of people did because the game had nothing going for it, so all you could do was talk shit and be toxic. So in a lot of ways, I think NRS is to blame for the toxicity of the community too during MK11's lifespan. But that's pretty much all it comes down to when I talk about the game being boring. It was limited options, and because they didn't really want to put any effort to balance the custom variation system or really rework it, you couldn't even play with that necessarily. There was just one good loadout per character for the most part, and what deviations from the meta that you could go to were so infinitesimally small that they may as well not have been there. So it just made the game hard to stay engaged with as a result. Alright, so the next thing with Mortal Kombat 11 I want to talk about is we got to talk about the accessibility issue with the game, right? So it was well known that part of the reason that the game was made the way it was it was designed to appeal to more people, right? They wanted to bring in more people to not only play the game, but they wanted more people to try to play the game competitively. And they thought that their way of doing this would be to make a game that was both less punishing and less demanding. And this, of course, resulted in my opinion, a disaster. I think Mortal Kombat 11, because it is so simplistic in its design, and because there's so little room for nuance or interesting tech, and because Flawless Block dominates so much of the pace of the game, I think it is absolutely very possible for someone who is dumber than you to beat you. You can have all the character knowledge in the world, you can know everything about the game there is to know, you can still lose to a dumbass, and it's mostly down to the fact that they took away so many options, so many layers of Yomi from the fundamentals of playing the game, that it ruined it. It prevented it from achieving its potential. Like, the fact that the game literally devolved in its end state into jab, throw, or flawless block microduck OS says everything about what substance the game had. And there is no strategy in doing that, really. Most people just rotated those options in a semi-random manner, and if it worked, it worked, and if it didn't, it didn't, because only one of those options was risky, which was throwing. The other two options had no risk attached to them, so you could just do them, right? I think anybody who thinks that they were mind gaming people with that stuff was delusional. If you really thought that you were outsmarting somebody because you didn't do the auto shimmy the last two times, but you did it this third time, I think that you need to reassess. You need to reassess your abilities as a fighting game player, dog. You just have to do it. There's no way. I do not believe that you can possibly believe that about yourself. If you're intellectually honest and you look at how the game is made, there's no way. And it's not just that. It's the fact that So, one thing, for example, that I thought was absolutely ridiculous. Of course, I'm going to think it's ridiculous, but I do think it's ridiculous, is how up twos and up threes were not completely equal across the cast, right? This is meant to be a universal mechanic that was meant to help you outplay people, that was not universally usable in the same ways, right? And the reason this is a problem was because the characters who got the up twos, up threes that were the best and should be used the way that they were used were the ones that were also the accessible characters that were super easy to pick up and also didn't take any risks. And that's also another part of the problem. The game lacks depth because breakaway combined with the amount of safety in the game makes the decision making just, I don't know how to describe it. It's like MK11 is designed up to a certain point to prevent you from being smarter than your opponent. NRS does not want you to be smarter than your opponent in MK11 up to a certain point. The game literally caps your ability to outplay somebody. It does. And it does so because of how restrictive the game is and how confined it is to the jab, throw, flawless block OS trifecta. I really think that that's what it comes down to. And that's the thing. I believe myself, personally, to be a pretty astute, adaptable fighting game player. Who, if you give me a wide array of options, I can condition you with those options and I can beat you by outsmarting you. I do not believe that's possible in MK11 in the current way the game is built. I don't think you are meant to be able to do that. I think that NRS, in their attempt to be accessible, they partially made a game that takes notes from a MOBA. It's very heavily about counter picks, whether it's character based or ability based. And I also think the other thing was, like I said, they wanted to make it so that the decision-making space in any given moment was so small that anybody could do it. And that's just not going to feel good to anybody, right? Combine that with the fact that the depth, if you want to call it that, is all loaded into people being given the ability to flip the flow of a match on somebody because the other guy was successful. So being able to flawless block out of hit stun if somebody tried to jail you, or being able to break away and potentially full combo punish somebody, like this is player power and interactivity being added into the exact situations where there should be no such thing, right? There should be no way for someone to undo their mistake and flip it to their advantage at almost no cost and no risk. But unfortunately, that's just not how it works in the game. So yeah, that's my take on that. So now we're going to move on to talking about the way the NRS treated the game itself and the community, and that'll cap off this video. Okay, so the final thing, and oddly enough, this may be the reason I hate MK11 most of all, comes down to the way the game was treated by the developer themselves, and the way in which they chose to address complaints about the game whenever they did try to do something. So, the game, of course, and I'm going to bring this up till my dying breath, was marketed as a return to a footsies heavy, neutral heavy game. Well, we know it's not that because there's wave dashing and there's all these fuck neutral moves that require specific hard reads to get around and all that kind of stuff. Things that like pretty much absolve you of the responsibility of having to be precise. And I think not having to be precise in a fighting game and being able to still get big reward is a sign of a game that's a failure. That's my personal opinion. You can disagree if you want to. I think that's a sign of a game, though, that's a failure. And the reason that I bring that up is because the way that they chose to address things in terms of patches really aggravated me. And that was because the decisions they would often make, instead of catering to the top 1% of their player base who were asking for very specific changes to the Pro Tour, that they were like going out on a limb for, spending their money potentially going into debt to travel for the game, instead of catering it to those players, the changes they made were the most moronic changes that often did nothing but take away depth from the game, took away decision making from the game, and basically made it so that they were changes that any idiot off the street could take advantage of and comprehend. So it kind of fits in with their accessibility goal, right? So even when it came to patching the game and addressing complaints, instead of addressing complaints, they just tried to cater the game more to the accessible audience they wanted to bring in, right? And that became very frustrating because the changes they made to the game, like the jump in change or like the refusal to put in real solid anti-airs to the game that were reliable, did not help those casuals. It did not help them. It didn't even help the competitive enthusiasts who were new. It just aggravated them. There were so many people who, once they got good at this game and they tried other fighting games and they realized what they were dealing with, that quit MK11 once they realized that. It was crazy. But like, the game couldn't even hold on to the audience it was supposed to attract in the first place. It's a nightmare. And combine this with the fact that developers were quite hostile to the community. Sometimes they talk shit to you or at you or about you. Like, Paulo Garcia actually talked shit about me at Combat Cup or at the Combat Finals for the first year of MK11. Paulo Garcia told Hayate in a conversation where Hayate was asking if they could make Aaron Black do more than 2-1-2-1-2 down 4 and scud shot. Paulo Garcia said, "You sound like Cherney right now, and I'm not interested in talking about it." That's the attitude that the makers of MK11 were coming at it with. Like, I was villainized for my criticism of the game. I was name dropped by employees, and they wouldn't entertain people who even broached on having similar criticisms of the game to me. I think that's wild. That's not only unprofessional, which of course is super unprofessional, right? It's ridiculously unprofessional. There's no doubt about that. But on top of that, to make changes only meant to support the lowest common denominator, which is definitely what they did in my opinion, it was terrible. It was frustrating, terrible. We were consistently getting ignored. I mean, there wasn't a single change in any patch for Mortal Kombat 11 that gave us what we wanted. Not a single one. If anyone was satisfied with those changes they were making, you either had to be new or you had to be relishing in the fact that you didn't have to think you were having success in the game. You know, guys like Jukes or guys like Mufasa, right? It's just embarrassing. I mean, the game was embarrassing. The developer embarrassed themselves with the way they conducted themselves in relation to the community and the game. I don't look back on the game fondly at all. I know there were some people who thought that maybe once I stepped away, I would be able to come back to the game and maybe approach it with a new perspective. But all my being away from the game and playing other fighting games has really illuminated for me how much of a failure it was. People like to bring up sales numbers, but I know for a fact, because I know people in this industry and I know how the cost of video games pan out, that they most likely lost money on MK11. It didn't matter that it sold so many copies. It didn't matter that it was mainstream wise very successful. It was an awful mess. Awful mess. Um, I hope that NRS learns their lesson for their next game. I really do, because there are a lot of these people in this community that I adore, that I love. They're good friends of mine. I love streaming, and I like streaming NRS games, even MK11 at times. And you know, I don't want to leave all that behind, but man, uh, MK12 and Justice 3, the Marvel game, whatever they're doing next, they have to completely walk back everything about the way MK11 was approached. They have to walk back every single thing, or it's just going to be a repeat. They're going to end up having plans to support the game long term. They'll end up having to cancel them again because no one wants to play their shitty game. But anyway, that's it for the video. I hope you enjoyed. That's my very vague, basic attempt at explaining why I can't stand MK11, why I think it's terrible. And I'll catch you guys later.